We got Tracy in Austin. How are you?
Okay.
Hi, Tracy.
Okay, but my biggest question is, and I started having these questions, like that dude, my mother died some years back, and I was raised like so many of us were, Christian, or, you know what I'm saying, up to Jesus and all that stuff. And as soon as they started dying, and I mean basically my whole family just started pretty much dropping. And I found myself almost alone. So,
right.
You know what happens normally. What happens, well, then if that happens, then that must not have been true, everything that they taught me, is what I'm thinking. Okay. So then it put me on this 10 to 12 year, I guess, excursion into life and death and life after death. And I read a lot of manuals about life after death, these people that die supposedly, and, you know, they souls and spirits go someplace else. I don't even want to touch on all that as much as what I want to ask you is one question. How do we, as atheists, if you're an atheist, if I'm an atheist, how do I personally get around the fact that creationists and atheists agree on one thing? And not too many people bring this up, but we all agree on one thing. The whole world agrees on one thing, the whole educated world, and that is, if you go back in time far enough, atheists, scientists, and creationists agree that at some point in time, before there was time, there was nothing. Everyone seems to be able to agree that there was absolutely nothing.
Actually,
and all I'm saying is this: how did we get here? Because if there's a Big Bang theory, which is what I'm trying to believe in, which is what I kind of cater to, there's a Big Bang. I have no problem with that. But my question to you is, and I can't believe you don't have this question because you guys are intelligent people, and I know you are. I can hear how you're talking.
We're ready to answer you, sir.
So I got to know in your mind that somewhere back there, you've got to wonder what made something go bang. And what I'm getting at is, and I'm sure you've heard this before, what I'm getting at is not a God, not an invisible friend or whatever. No. But some type of intelligent design seems to just not be able to leave my consciousness alone. I just don't see how we could come from nothing to nothing. Like the old song goes, the old black song back in the day, nothing from nothing leaves nothing.
Yeah.
And I'll stop right there, and I just want to know what you got to think about that.
You're engaged. It's an argument from ignorance, is what it is.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
That's why you have this appeal for intelligent design. First of all, everybody in the world doesn't agree about this idea of nothing. And what I'd recommend is that after the show's over, the first thing you do is go out and Google "Universe from Nothing" by Lawrence Krauss. It's a lecture, a talk he gave at the Atheist Alliance International convention from 2009. It's going to be about the best explanation of what physicists mean when they talk about nothing and something coming from nothing.
Okay.
But even setting that aside, what you're basically saying is, I can't see how this could have happened without an intelligence. And that is a definition of an argument from incredulity, argument from ignorance, that I can't understand X, or I can't think of a better explanation than X, therefore X is the most plausible and the one I'm going to accept. And that's simply not true. Intelligence needs to be demonstrated.
Okay. And
it doesn't become the default.
Intelligent, an intelligent being, by the ape being intelligent, by the fish being intelligent, by dolphins being intelligent. I mean, something to me, I don't know where they come from. I mean, is that not a question that you ever have in your mind at all?
Is evolution a problem for you, or are you okay with evolution?
I'm okay with evolution. That's the big thing. That's why I got such a problem with all my Christian friends, because I'm okay with that, and they ready to put me out of their house. But my problem is,
Tracy?
I think that evolution had a designer, or some kind of a design. Something said, start from here.
I see.
And
then you don't know what
But I began,
Tracy,
something,
Tracy,
man. I don't know.
Tracy,
what do you think, man?
May I?
Yes.
Yeah, Tracy, but that's the whole point of the theory of evolution. Is how is it that all these different forms could come into existence in all their varied types and with all their varied abilities without intelligence? That's what evolution is about. Now, I know it's very popular for a lot of people who still have an impulse to want to believe that there is a guiding hand behind all of it. It's very popular for them to say, well, you know, maybe the process is tweaked by an intelligence as it goes along.
Yes, exactly.
But the point, but what I'm telling you, Tracy, what I'm telling you is the point of the theory is that you don't need that.
Oh.
That intelligence slapped on top of the process of evolution is extraneous and unnecessary.
Okay.
And if you think it's not, it's because you don't yet have a complete grasp of what the theory is saying.
It's like saying that you believe that an oak tree can grow out of the seed, but that you think there's some being who comes along and bends the limbs just the right way, in between.
No, my friend.
It is exactly like that.
That's an analogy,
Because we
Tracy.
both agree, and we all agree that it came from that damn seed. We know that.
Yeah,
but what I want to know is where'd that seed come from?
Okay,
From
so
the
now
tree
we're back.
before it.
Well, that's why I asked. That's why I asked about evolution, right? Because if you're okay with evolution,
Yeah.
then you should be okay with the idea that
It just happened?
no, just a minute. Evolution didn't just happen. There's natural laws that all of the physical parts involved in evolution are following.
And what you just said, they're laws. See, that's what I'm saying. I'm so mankind, because laws come from man.
No, they don't. We call things laws. Maybe it's an analogy. Maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Maybe the fact that we use the same word for things passed, rules passed by men, and for processes we see happening automatically in nature, right? Maybe the fact we use the same word for those two things is confusing, but they're not the same kind of thing. Right? Then that's not what I mean when I use the word.
When they talk about laws of gravity and laws of nature, and those are like rules and laws. It seems like they're rules or laws, and it seems like certain things have to follow them. You know what I'm saying? Like Newton's thing of relativity. But I mean, a law seems to have been put into design. I don't know, man.
Well, I just explained.
Can you kind of see what I'm getting at? Can you kind of see my dilemma a little bit, though?
Tracy, if you hang on, he'll explain it.
Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, we just went over that. I mean, it's the same word used two different ways for two different kinds of things.
There's a difference between descriptive laws and proscriptive laws.
Okay,
That's
right.
a good point.
Descriptive laws are, we look at what is happening and we see the way that nature behaves, right?
Yes.
And we find regularities, and then we say, well, that is the way it behaves. We'll call that the law, right?
Okay.
The law of gravity, right?
That clears that
Laws
up.
of motion.
That makes sense.
Where we're using the word law for a thing we simply observe happening in nature. But the reason why things in nature happen, that things in nature follow those laws, is because of the physical properties of those things interacting.
Yes.
Okay? It's not because some outside force is saying, why, someone has dropped an object, therefore, I command that object to fall to the earth. No. Gravity is a natural thing that just happens.
Yes.
Okay? All right. So the reason I brought up evolution was to get back to the question of origins. I mean, Matt's advice is probably the best thing to do is go look for Lawrence Krauss's lecture, which will explain this in more detail. But just for the moment, to make this a little easier for your mind to deal with, right?
Yeah.
You have to. It's not exact. It is true in a sense that the naturalistic view of the origin of the universe and the religious view of the origin of the universe come back to some point where things appear to start. Okay. Now the details and the much more complex, deep physics details of that you get from that lecture. But there is a difference between the naturalistic view and the religious view. Okay. The naturalistic view is at that starting point.
Yeah.
There's very, very, very simple stuff, right?
Okay.
There's a hot, I'm not sure what plasma is probably not even the right word, right? And we have a physicist here and he can't jump in the middle of this. But there's just a initial condition that's very hot, very dense, right? I mean, matter hasn't even condensed out of this stuff yet. That's what you have on the one hand. Incredibly simple. And then on the religious view, you have an intelligence. And an intelligence is an incredibly complicated thing. So between those two views of that starting point, right, the naturalistic view is the simpler one, the one that takes much less of a leap to accept. See what I'm saying?
Okay.
And if you can accept that, if you can accept evolution, that diversity and complexity and things emerge from the interaction of stuff, all within natural laws, then you should be able to accept that the galaxies and stars and planets could form out according to natural laws out of that very simplistic set of starting conditions. Right?
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Look at the difference. That what religion is asking you to believe at that starting moment is something much less likely, right? Much more of a stretch. Something hugely more complex, an intelligence that has not only that, but it has the power to guide everything else that's happening, right? Okay. That's what religion is asking you to believe. And physics is just asking you to believe.
I'm sort of having some problems with that right there. My biggest problem is what we're talking about. Is what we're talking about is that starting point, man. That one initial starting point. And I guess if I can just wrap my mind around that.
We're recommending you watch that lecture.
That's what I need to do, man.
The other thing that I'd say is that, not quibbling over the ideas of nothing or whatever else, we're at a point where we understand that at some point the universe began to exist in the current form that we observe it. And we've we label that in most of the time we label that as Big Bang. Big Bang cosmology. I mean, it's already been confirmed to the extent possible that we can confirm it by cosmic microwave background radiation that it did in fact happen. So then you say, what happened before the Big Bang? Well, maybe, hang on, it may be the case that is a bad question. That the nature of time in the universe is such that question just cannot be asked with any coherence and therefore cannot be answered. It may also be the case that the answer is, I don't know.
I talked about this to another atheist once upon a time, and he told me that exact thing. He said that's one of those things, Tracy, because he got kind of frustrated with me because I kept going back to that one point, and he said, you know what? That's one of those things that are just unknowable. And you
no. How many no's was that? I did not say unknowable.
No, I didn't say you. I said I was talking to another
I understand, but you were equating me.
He was telling me that was not that. That's not what you said, but that's what he said. And
right. So let's not talk about what he said. Let's have this conversation between us.
Right.
I didn't say unknowable. I said that is something that we simply don't know. We may be able to find out. And the reason I'm harping on that point is because it's going to matter a whole bunch here in just a second.
All right.
What you're saying is that instead of saying we don't know, you find it more plausible that there is an intelligence for which you have no evidence, and your argument is that either this is just what I believe or this is just what seems more plausible to me.
More plausible, yes.
And I would ask you, how on earth can you determine that it's more plausible when you have no evidence to support it?
Well, it's the same thing. You have no evidence to support what you're saying either.
No.
The beginning of the thing. Now, you have some evidence as far as the Big Bang, and I agree with you on that. And
Tracy.
You have some evidence when it comes to evolution. But you yourself have no evidence. We're both having to take a leap of faith how this whole thing got started.
No, we're not, Tracy. Tracy, no leap of faith. Here, look. Here's a line where this pen is. This represents the Big Bang. And I'm saying, I don't know what happened before that. Okay. And you're saying you believe that it's most plausible that an intelligence caused it. I'm not taking a leap of faith. How dare you represent that I am? You're taking a leap of faith. You're saying that you find it more plausible that there's an intelligence behind it. And I asked, how is it that you find this more plausible without evidence to support it? And instead of presenting evidence, instead you tried to equate our positions as if we're both taking a leap of faith, when that's not remotely true.
I got you.
You'll remember.
I got you.
You'll remember.
You'll
remember that I said it was important a minute ago that I did not say unknowable. I said I don't know.
And you're okay
it is not only important because
you're okay with that for now.
I'm not only okay with it, I'm overjoyed with it.
Right.
Because I have not taken a walk down the credulous lane of arguments of ignorance that allow me to posit the existence of a creator for which I have no evidence at all. Because what happens as soon as I start believing that is it curtails all further investigation down that path. As second you accept an answer as the most plausible one without evidence, your journey is done. As soon as you say, I don't know, but let's see if we can find out, that's when the journey begins. It's not a leap of faith.
Dude, I got to tell you.
It is not a leap of faith.
No, it's not, because you're not going to commit either way. I mean, to have a leap of faith, you're right. I said that wrong, because if you automatically say, I don't know, it doesn't take a leap of faith to say, I don't know. You're right, bro.
There you go.
I'm 100%. Hey, man, listen, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, man. I really do. And I don't know how or why, but these things help me every now and then. I'll call you guys every now and then, man.
But hey, stop by sometime. Thanks a lot, Tracy. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye, guys.
Later.
Bye.